You introducing yourself first, Kevin?
Go ahead, Helena. Let you have the honors, then Crystal, then me.
All right. I'm Helena Reuter. I'm the Acting Historic Preservation Officer and very excited. Last year was the first year we had exterior rehabilitation grant money and quite a long time, and it came together so quickly we didn't have the opportunity to do a workshop like this. So very excited to have the opportunity to do that this time around. And Kevin is going to be our primary educator. So Kevin, if you want to introduce yourself.
Well, let's let Crystal go ahead first, and then we'll come back to me.
Hi there, I'm Crystal Carancho. I'm a planner with the Historic Preservation Office, and I will be working with some of you on these future grants projects.
All right, thank you. And I am Kevin Waite. I'm the principal planner with the city's Historic Preservation Office. I also help manage the grant program, and I will be the primary presenter tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Got a PowerPoint presentation that we will kind of jump in and out of, as well as looking at some other documents. So I want to welcome again everybody here.
And Kevin, I'll just say the city's lights go off at 6:15 inside City Hall. So at that time, I will be running across the way to return the lights back on.
Thank you, Helena. I appreciate that. Otherwise, it'll be a very dark workshop here for all of us. Here's our agenda for tonight. We've got basically 4 things that we're going to cover. The first is a review of the application packet, which is available online. And then the second thing we're going to cover are key dates. Third thing are final points to consider, just things that we want to make sure you're aware of before you submit your application. And then at the end, we will have time for questions and answers. We do have the chat function disabled, but we do have the question and answers function enabled. So if you have questions, we would like you to go ahead and submit those, and we'll do our best to answer them, but we will hold them until the end because there's a good chance that we may cover some of the questions that you have in the presentation. So first item, the application packet. It consists of 6 documents. The first is the program guide. And then there is an exterior rehabilitation grant application. This is the actual application that you will fill out and submit to the Historic Preservation Office. There's also a sample grant application that hopefully is helpful to give you an idea of what we're looking for as you fill out the application. Fourth document is a sample program agreement, and actually 4, 5, and 6 are all sample legal agreements. So these are documents that you will be required to sign if you are successful in receiving the grant funding. The program agreement is our actual contract between you and the city. And then the deed of conservation easement is the deed that will get recorded with the property for the conservation easement. And the consent agreement is a document that your mortgage company or lien holder will need to sign for you to participate in the program. And the application packet, if you haven't already found it, is available on the City Historic Preservation website. You see here at the bottom of the screen, the address is phoenix.gov/pdd/preservation/exterior-rehab-assistance. It's kind of long. If you go to phoenix.gov/pdd and click on the links to historic preservation financial assistance, you'll find your way there as well. But this is the direct link that will take you right to the exterior rehabilitation page. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the PowerPoint right now, and I'm going to jump into each one of these 6 documents and go through them pretty quickly. So you may have questions, but for the sake of time, I'm going to try not to dwell too long on any particular one. Go ahead and share the first document here, which is the Exterior Rehabilitation Grant Program Guide. Now, it's very important that you read through this document. This has pretty much what you need to know about the grant program. Most important thing right here, application deadline, November 18th, 2022, 5 p.m. That's a Friday. So again, make sure you know the deadline. You're welcome to submit earlier, but that is the cutoff. We will not accept applications after that time. And the applications are to be submitted to the Historic Preservation Office via email. The email address is what you see here, historic@Phoenix.gov. That's our general inbox. If you have questions of any sort, you're welcome to send an inquiry to this email address while you're preparing your application, and we will do our best to respond to them in a timely manner. So scrolling down, past the cover sheet, page 2 is a table of contents with various items that we'll go ahead and again cover pretty quickly. Starting on page 3, the background. The exterior rehab program actually dates back to the 1989 bond program where voters in Phoenix approved $15 million specifically for historic preservation. $5 million of that was allocated for Tovry Castle, and then the other $10 million was made available to private property owners in the form of grants. And so the following fiscal year, 1990 to 91, was the first year that we had the exterior rehabilitation grant program available. In 2001, voters again approved a bond for historic preservation, $14.2 million that time around, and we were able to continue the exterior rehabilitation program. And in 2006, voters again approved $13.1 million in bond funds, and again, we were able to fund the exterior rehabilitation program. Well, the final ER grant round from the 26 bond was in 2015. And since 2015, we have not had any rounds for grants. It's been somewhat unfortunate, but fortunately, the City Council decided to address the problem by allocating money in the city's general fund for the exterior rehab program. They set aside $200,000 last fiscal year, and so we had a round last fall where we were able to approve 12 applications. And then in June of 2022, the City Council again approved $200,000 in funding, and that is the money that is currently available that you can apply for on November 18th. A summary of the program, we provide assistance to encourage residents to maintain, repair, and sensitively rehabilitate historic homes and to encourage revitalization in historic neighborhoods. So the program makes money available to private property owners to complete exterior rehab, repair, or restoration work on historic homes or residential structures continuing to serve a residential purpose. So again, this program is primarily for residences. If you're here because you're interested in a commercial property, or let's say a school, a church, something that's not a historic home, email us or call us directly. We may have another program that could better serve you. Again, this program is primarily intended for historic residences. The qualifications to apply, the home does have to be in either a city designated historic district or individually listed on the city's historic register to apply. There are some neighborhoods such as Westwood Village and Estates that were recently listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but are not listed on the Phoenix Register, and unfortunately those neighborhoods are not eligible. You do have to have city designation to apply for this city-funded program. The program reimburses owners on a 50-50 matching basis for pre-approved work. So in your application, you're going to tell us the work that you want to do, and we can approve it. And then once the work is completed, we will reimburse you for half of the amount. The intention being that the city pays half and the owner pays the other half. The minimum amount that you can apply for is $5,000, and the maximum amount is $20,000. And then in exchange for receiving the grant funds, the property owner agrees to sell the city a conservation easement to protect the historic character of the property's exterior. And I'll explain the conservation easement very quickly here. As a government entity, the city is not allowed simply to give money to a private property owner, no matter how good their intentions may be, whatever they want to do with the money. The gift clause of Arizona's state constitution does not allow us to just give money away without getting some compensation in return. And so we are able to provide these grant funds by essentially purchasing an easement, a conservation easement on the historic property. And the conservation easement is an agreement between the property owner and the city that just says the city's giving me X number of dollars. I'm going to use it to improve my property, doing the things we mutually agree on, and then I'm going to preserve the property for either 15 or 20 years, depending on the dollar amount, once the work is completed. That, in essence, is the conservation easement. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that when we hit the actual document. The program goals and principles, again, we're promoting preservation of historic buildings through proper rehabilitation. And a successful rehabilitation is one that retains, preserves, and protects as much of the original historic fabric as possible. It also preserves the original character defining architectural elements of a particular building. So really, we're wanting you to take a restoration approach here. Don't change the design of the historic home. If it has been changed, go back to the original design. Keep it as authentic and original as you can. And if you do that, your application is likely to score well and your chances of being funded are much, much higher. If you propose changing original features or designs of the building, your chances of getting funded are going to be dramatically lower. So again, follow these principles. It's preferable to repair rather than replace significant architectural elements. So if you have windows or other features of your home that can be repaired, do that. Don't replace them unless they are completely deteriorated beyond repair or they're missing. If they're missing, then it's okay to install windows that replicate ones that might have been there originally. And again, if you've got documentation that shows what was there originally, even better. We'll go ahead and skip down here a little bit. For further guidance, please review the general design guidelines for historic properties. There's a link in the guide that takes you to that document, and it can be very helpful. Again, eligibility for participation, you do have to own the property. And there may be cases where that's not, currently the case, and we'll come back and address that at the end. The property does not need to be owner occupied, though. It can be a rental. So you don't necessarily have to live in it, but the owner is expected to be the one who will apply for the funds. And that's because the owner is going to have to sign the legal agreements afterward. So it's important that they're the ones doing it. It's worth noting that employees of the City of Phoenix Planning and Development Department and their families are not eligible to apply. But if you are a city employee in a different department, you may apply. To be considered for funding, again, applicants must own the property or provide legal authorization from the owner to apply for funding, along with evidence of the owner's willingness to execute all of the legal agreements. What's eligible for funding? What type of work? And here's a not comprehensive list, but a pretty good list that tells you what's eligible. It must be exterior work. So generally we don't fund anything on the interior. So exterior work that results in the preservation of the building. And again, we want you to take a restoration approach here. Items include roof repairs or replacement, foundation repairs, structural rehabilitation or reinforcement, exterior wall repairs, masonry or stucco repairs, exterior windows and doors, porch and step rehabilitation, cornices and parapets. Repainting is eligible if it is part of a larger scope of work. We don't generally pay for painting just as a standalone item, but we do expect that if you're going to repair windows, you're probably going to need to repaint them afterward. If you are repointing mortar on a painted brick wall, you're probably going to need to repaint that as well. So repainting can be included if it's part of a larger scope. Garages, guest house, or other outbuildings can be included. I will warn you, if your entire scope of work is a garage, it probably won't score that high on its own, especially if it's something that's at the back of the lot that you really can't see from the street. But if you are re-roofing your house, and let's say you want to do the garage as well, the garage is historic, you can certainly include both buildings in your application. Garages and other historic outbuildings are eligible. Reversal of previous inappropriate alterations is also eligible. So if you've got a porch, let's say your front porch got enclosed many years ago and you want to reopen it and restore it to its original appearance, that is strongly encouraged and is eligible under the grant program. Demolition of non-historic additions is also eligible, especially if it's something that really detracts from the integrity of the home. We can help fund its demolition, but only if it's non-historic. And then reconstruction of original architectural elements is also eligible, provided that you've got documentation or some evidence showing what was there and we can reasonably reconstruct it. We do pay for some soft costs. Engineering costs are eligible if they are related directly to the eligible work, and the costs are incurred either 2 years prior to or 1 year after the application date. However, they cannot amount to more than 20% of the total funding request. These costs can include historic structure reports or drawings and specifications. And in fact, if you are going to apply for structural stabilization, we actually do need to see an engineer's report showing the justification for that work and how it's going to be carried out. Mentioned earlier the funding for paint removal. Again, not a standalone item, but if it's something that's part of a larger scope of work, it can be included. If you are requesting funds to remove the paint from your home, let's say again, you've got a historic brick home, it's painted, you want to remove the paint, you need to demonstrate that the house was unpainted historically. Many homes actually were painted originally, and in that case, we would not want you to remove the paint, because the paint is part of the original character. But if you do have evidence showing that the house was not painted originally and you want to remove it, that's an eligible item. We would ask that you follow the paint removal methods document that we have available, as well as masonry cleaning procedures when applicable. We have other technical bulletins too that provide guidance for windows and roof projects. So we would ask you to follow those. Elena, it looks like we just lost the lights. Oh, thank you, Kristen. Get the lights back on here. But we'll move on in the meantime. Energy efficiency and window projects are always a big question that come up. And again, we want you to take a restoration approach, which means keep the windows that are there and repair them to the extent possible. Again, if they're missing, different story. If they've already been replaced with something that's not historically appropriate, we can work with you on an appropriate replacement. But otherwise, if you've got original steel windows or wood casement windows or double hung wood windows, keep them. Do everything you can to repair them. Otherwise, your application may not be funded. And energy efficiency is always a concern, so we can help pay for the installation of window film, which can help improve energy efficiency. We can also help retrofit glass. So if you have a very thin single pane historic glass, that can actually be replaced with a thicker single pane glass, a hard coat, low E glass. In some cases, you might even be able to do a dual pane if the sash is thick enough to support dual pane, as a replacement. And that is an eligible item. Again, we'd want you to keep the sash, keep the frames, but the glass itself could be replaced. Now, there are some exceptions to this. If you've got some real unique historic glass, such as leaded glass or stained glass, sometimes if the house is old enough, you might even have the real wavy glass that's character defining. In that case, we'd say, yeah, don't replace that glass. It really is an important part of the character. But many of the homes from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, the glass is not that unique and could be replaced within the sash. As a general rule, we ask the window films and replacement glass be relatively clear. Now that doesn't mean it has to be completely clear, but the visible light rating, which is the VTR or the VLT, it can have a couple different acronyms. We ask that it be 0.65 or higher. So on a scale of 0 to 1, where 0 is completely dark and 1 is just clear glass, we want you to be in the upper half of that range, so 0.65 or higher. If you go lower than that, the windows are likely going to look too dark or too reflective and won't be appropriate for a historic residential setting. Again, moving on, additions to buildings, new construction, and work on additions that are not historic are not eligible for grant funding. So just keep that in mind. If you've got a later home that was built, let's say in the 70s or 80s, anything after, the 1950s is probably not going to be considered historic. If you've got a garage or something that's later, don't include it in your scope because it will likely hurt your application or disqualify you altogether. Additionally, landscaping, fencing, and other types of site improvements are not eligible for funding. We're really just interested in work to the building itself, and particularly the historic home, although again, accessory buildings can be eligible as well. Project selection criteria, we're going to give top priority to applications that do the following. Clearly demonstrate adherence to the city's preservation philosophy and general design guidelines for historic properties. So make sure you're following preservation standards. If you are, you'll be in good shape. Don't deviate. You need to demonstrate proper rehabilitation techniques based on historic preservation principles. And again, we've got these technical bulletins on various subjects that are intended to provide guidance. We can provide those on request. We also plan to give priority to applications that clearly address the most critical physical needs of the building. So if you've got structural issues, let's say the foundation or the roof is having problems, address those first. And we want to make sure that that's where you're starting before you look at more cosmetic items. We'll give priority to applications that substantially improve the visual appearance of an historic neighborhood, a district streetscape, or an individual property. Again, something that's really been blighted. If you're going to turn around and make it, beautiful, that's great. That'll help not just your property, but the neighborhood. And those are ones that get high priority. Also, if you have a property that is a non-contributor, now a word of caution on this, if it's a non-contributor because of its age, again, let's say it was built in 1970, 1980, something after the 1950s, much later than the other homes in the district, it'll be classified as non-contributing and it's not likely going to be eligible for grant funding. But sometimes non-contributors are classified as such because earlier homes from the historic era have been modified. Again, let's use the example where you've got a front porch that's been enclosed and it's really changed the appearance of the home significantly and resulted in the property being reclassified as non-contributing. If you propose a grant project that reopens that porch and takes the house back to its historic appearance, that is a wonderful project. And that falls under this category here of returning a non-contributing property to contributing status. We welcome and encourage those projects. We would love to see those. So please, if you have something that fits that mold, go ahead and apply. And if you have questions about, what category your project may be in, let us know and we can answer them for you before you submit. Also, we'll give priority to applications that encourage the investment of private funds to protect deteriorated historic properties, and projects that completely address each question on the application form and include detailed bids for all proposed work items. We also do give points when we do the scoring to applications that reflect appropriate research on the architectural elements and history of the house. Now, we don't expect you to do a ton of original research. We just want to make sure that you know the basic information, the basic features of the home, and we're actually happy to provide that for you. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. In addition, the significance of the house, the overall quality of the application, and the adequacy of the bids also play a role in your overall score. So, a Frank Lloyd Wright house is going to score a little bit higher than, say, a ranch house from the 40s or 50s. That's just part of the scoring system. But if you have a really high quality application and your bids are solid, then you'll score very well in those areas. Mentioned the funding limits before, but I'll just repeat them again. It's a 50-50 match. We'll fund up to $20,000. The minimum you can apply for is $5,000. So let's say if your scope of work is $10,000, again, your grant amount will be $5,000 or 50% of that. And again, if you have a $40,000 project, then your grant amount will be $20,000, 50%. As far as the budget and contractors, so it's up to you to find your contractor or craftsman or whoever you want to do the work. We don't choose for you. In fact, we're not actually even allowed to recommend. It's up to you to find the contractor that you feel is best. The Arizona Preservation Foundation does provide a resource guide that may be of interest to you. And their website is azpreservation.org. So you might be able to get some ideas from them, but otherwise you're on your own to find the contractor. And so you need to provide estimates from whichever contractor you choose. You only need one estimate. It used to be back in the early days of this program that you needed 2 estimates. We've changed that now. Just one good estimate is all you need. And the estimate's important because that will establish the dollar amount for your grant and ultimately what we will pay you going forward. The property owner is encouraged to select the contractor who is best qualified to perform the scope of work. So we want to make sure you're choosing people that have, done this type of work before, they have experience and will do a good job. Because the last thing you want is to bring somebody on and then they do something that's not in keeping with historic preservation standards, and then we may end up not being able to issue the grant funds. So it's very important to choose the right contractor. Selection of the lowest price is not required. So you can go with a higher cost if you feel it's appropriate. That's okay. Just remember the most we can pay for is $20,000. But you're certainly welcome to go above that if you feel it's appropriate to do so. All cost estimates need to be on letterhead from the contractor and include their contact information. Can't just have a handwritten note. We really do want to make sure it is legitimate. It's worth noting here that if a contractor has a documented history of failing to meet deadlines for city-funded work, then we do reserve the right to reject that contractor, in which case then you may be asked to find a different contractor. This has not been a problem recently, so I don't really envision it being an issue, but just FYI, it is on here if needed. And then please make sure you list the bid amount in your application, and I'll show you in just a moment where you do that in the application. Building permit fees, if applicable, are the sole responsibility of the owner. We cannot provide grant funds for those. They help pay the salary of many employees of the Planning and Development Department. In fact, even a couple members of the Historic Preservation Office are funded through building permit fees. So unfortunately, they cannot be included in grant projects. All right, commencement and deadlines. We do expect you to start within 90 days of getting City Council approval. Now I'll come back to the key dates later on, but just know the 90 days is kind of a goal. It's not hard and fast, but that's the goal we'd like you to achieve is once we get City Council approval, try to start within 90 days. But there are some boxes that we need to check before you can start that are fairly important. So sometimes the 90 days turns into a longer time frame. And the work does need to be completed within 2 years of the date that the agreement is signed. That date is largely non-negotiable. We have a lot of issues that come up if you go beyond 2 years. And so we're pretty hard and fast on the 2-year rule. The application approval process, again, you're going to go ahead and submit to us via email at historic@phoenix.gov, and make sure you get that to us before November 18th. Should mention, since you are submitting via email, any file sizes that exceed 25 megabytes should be split up, sent in separate emails. You're welcome to send zip files. That tends to work fairly well. We can unzip them, decompress them when we get the files. Also, links to cloud storage services. You're welcome to send those. Dropbox as an example. There may be other sites too. We do have some limited technology to be able to download those, but we can do that if that helps. Some of the sites are blocked here at the city, but if we need to, we can work with our IT staff to unblock them. But please make sure that we received everything you sent prior to the deadline. If you split it up, let's say you sent 3 or 4 emails and we think you only sent 2, just follow up with us and make sure we got everything. And then all application materials, again, must be received by 5 p.m. on November 18th. Late applications and those missing crucial elements, such as cost estimates, photos, or the site plan, will not be considered for funding. So quickly, here's the process that will happen. Once we receive your application, our staff will verify that it's complete. We'll evaluate the proposed work items to make sure that the critical needs are being addressed and that the proposed work meets city historic preservation philosophy and program goals. Eligible applications are forwarded to an advisory panel to be competitively ranked. The panel consists primarily of city staff, but we do from time to time invite members of the Historic Preservation Commission, historic neighborhood representatives, or previous grant recipients to join us in that panel just so we can get an outside perspective or two to help us when we score the applications. The panel recommendations then get forwarded to the full Historic Preservation Commission for consideration. They make a recommendation that then goes to the City Council. Often a City Council subcommittee will review the recommendations before the final approval is granted by the full City Council in a formal meeting. And then once we have the City Council approval, we will notify applicants if you were successful or not. If you were approved, then we ask that you register as a vendor using the city's Procure Phoenix portal. And that's necessary just so we can set you up so the city can start issuing payments to you through the grant program. You'll need to go on there and set up a user ID and password and upload any relevant documents to the portal. Typically, what is needed is a W-9 form. I think you're also required to submit an affidavit of lawful presence, which is a state of Arizona requirement. And then once that's done, we do have you sign the agreements. And we also do need to have your mortgage company, or if there's another lien holder on the property, consent to the grant funds and the recordation of the deed of conservation easement. And so there's a specific consent agreement that they need to sign. We also do need to have proof of insurance for the property. And so once we get those items from you, you can start work and we can start issuing grant payments, again, within that 2-year time frame. If you're not funded, we'll let you know that as well. We typically email folks to let them know. If you're not successful during this round, it's okay. Come meet with us, have a conversation. We'll see if there's a way you can potentially improve your score and have you resubmit in a future round. It's actually fairly common that folks that were not funded initially resubmit and get funded the second or sometimes even the third time around. So if you're rejected once, it's not the end of the road. You can always reapply. Project sign, we used to back in the day have signs that got posted in people's front yards, letting folks know that they were doing work that was funded through the city's grant program. We're still kind of deciding if we're going to do that for this round, but we did include it as an option. So we'll let you know about whether we'll do the signs. Has not been determined yet. For the contractual requirements, the city will go ahead and order a title report once you've been approved for funding. So we'll know if there are any mortgages or liens on your property that will affect our ability to record the conservation easement. Once we receive that title report, we will go ahead and contact your lien holder or mortgage company and send them the consent agreement for them to sign. We'll let you know as well that we're sending it to them. We'll keep you in the loop on all of these discussions that we have with the mortgage company. And so I should mention, this is one of the longest delays that we run into. We still have some grant applications from the last round where folks were funded in December of last year, where the mortgage companies still have not submitted the consent agreement. And so we are waiting patiently to get that. You know, we've had some that have been received and have moved forward, but we still have a few that have not. And so I will just encourage you as strongly as I can, if you're going to submit an application, contact your mortgage company as soon as you can. Let them know what your intention is with the grant. Send them the sample consent agreement and deed of conservation easement and let them know that we will need them to sign the consent agreement. Find out who the appropriate party is, especially if it's a big company. I'll give you an example. I recently have been trying to work with Chase Mortgage, trying to get a consent agreement signed for a particular grant applicant. And they required that we fax them the documents, which seems strange to me because I haven't sent a fax in years, but that's what they required. And then after that, we got transferred a couple of times before we finally realized that the research department was the right department to work with. And then we finally found the right person in the research department and were able to make contact and get some progress with the consent agreement. Now, if you can do some of that before we send the agreements out, it will save you a whole lot of time later on. So we want to encourage applicants to consider doing that. Again, applicants strongly encouraged to contact lien holders prior to submitting grant applications to find the most appropriate contact person and to verify participation requirements. Some lien holders too require processing fees. Some of them too, we've had some even require appraisals. We've been able to push back to some degree on that and tell them, no, we're not, you know, nothing's really changing here other than the property owner improving the home. And so a lot of times we're able to get the appraisal requirement waived, but just know sometimes mortgage companies ask for a lot to process these, so be prepared. The program agreement, again, is our contract that we will sign with you that lays out the time frame to carry out the project, the completion requirements, and how we're going to disperse the funds. And we'll come back to that in just a moment. And the deed of conservation easement is what will get recorded with the property, again, for either 15 or 20 years. If your grant funding is between $5,000 and $10,000, it will be a 15-year easement. If the funding is between $10,001 and $20,000, the term will be 20 years on the conservation easement. And just note that once that conservation easement is recorded, it'll show up in the title and it will run with the land for that 15 or 20-year time period. So if you sell the property, know that it'll still be there for the new owner and they will have to abide by the terms of the conservation easement. Now that may scare some folks, you know, it's like, oh, this is going to make it so I can't sell the property. We really haven't seen conservation easements be a detriment at all for people selling properties. In fact, if anything, if you improve the property using the grant funds, it'll generally increase the value of the property. It makes it easier to sell. And just know that the new owner, will have to be aware of the easement and be willing to abide by the terms. And then the insurance requirement that I mentioned earlier, the city does have to be added to the insurance policy as a loss payee and an additional insured party. And that is because the property does need to be insured in the event of loss or damage. And we just want to make sure, let's say, I'll give you an example from a few years ago. There was a house in Willow where a tree blew over during a monsoon and smashed the front wall of the house. Well, fortunately, the insurance company was able to take care of it. They were able to rebuild the front wall and the portion of the roof that was damaged. The city was named as a loss payee in that case, so we signed off on the grant funds as well as the property owner to make sure that the insurance funds went to repairing the property as needed. And then we're also on the policy for liability purposes. Let's say somebody slips on the sidewalk outside of your home. They decide they're going to sue you and they see, oh, the city's got a conservation easement on this property too. We're going to sue the city too. the insurance policy helps cover the city for liability purposes in that case. Disbursement of funds, you're allowed up to 3 draws. So you don't have to wait until the very end to get your full grant allotment. We can actually split it into 3 separate payments. So let's say you've got $20,000 worth of work. If you want to, the first payment can be $10,000, the second one can be $7,500, and the third one can be $2,500. Whatever makes sense based on the work you've completed. That's how we could split up the 3 payments. And again, it's intended to reimburse you for 50% of work completed. So if the invoice shows $2,500, the check that we cut for you will be for $1,250. The way you'll do the reimbursement is we have a form that you'll fill out and you'll send it to us when you're ready for payment. We'll go out and inspect the property. It may take us up to 10 days to complete the inspection. We try to turn them around as quickly as we can, but sometimes it could take longer just depending on scheduling. And then once we verify the work was completed per our agreement, we'll go ahead and process the payment. It typically takes 30 days for a check to get issued and mailed to you. And again, this is where the vendor registration is important because you go into the website, you sign up as a vendor, you say, here's where I want my checks mailed. And then that's where, when we issue the payment, the checks get sent to that address. All right, that's the end of the program guide. Thank you for bearing with me on that. We're going to move now to the actual application form. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the form itself, but just know it is a fillable form, so you're welcome to type in your information here in the fillable form. Any space where there's an entry, go ahead and type that. If there's spaces up at the top where there's not a fillable spot, leave that blank. We'll fill that in. But if you really want to print this and handwrite it, you're welcome to, but we've tried to make it easier for you by making it a fillable form. So this is what you'll actually type up and send to us with the required attachments. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this document and go to the sample grant application. We've provided this sample just to give you an example of what your final application should look like. Now, again, it doesn't have to look exactly like this. This is just a sample, give you an idea. Yours may look a little bit different. That's okay. So go ahead and just fill out the property identification. Give us this basic information. If you're not sure what historic district you're in, we can help provide that information. And it may be different from the original subdivision name, so just check with us if you're not sure. Project summary. In this case, briefly describe what you know about the historical and architectural significance of the property, including the date of construction. Now, we want you to use the historic property inventory form for your property to complete this information. And if you're not familiar with the historic property inventory form, the vast majority of homes that are on the city's historic register have an inventory form. And I'll come back when we go back to the PowerPoint a little bit later on and show you what that looks like. But the inventory form is great because it'll have the construction date. It'll have just basic details about the home. You know, is it brick or is it wood frame? Does it have a wood shingle roof, asphalt, or something different? Or does it have steel casement windows or wood windows? What other unique features might it have? And so the inventory form will kind of note each of those things. It may also tell you the original owner of the home. It may tell you the architect and builder if it's known who they were. And then sometimes there are also references to newspaper articles, building permits, that sort of thing. So it's a great resource. It is definitely the place to start when you fill out this application. And so unfortunately, we don't have them readily available online, but email us. We are happy to send you a copy of your inventory form. In fact, we want you to have this form when you complete this application. I can't emphasize it strongly enough. And attach a copy of the form to the application when you send it to us as part of the submittal. Now, I will mention there are a handful of properties on the city's register that don't have an inventory form. If you're in the Encanto Palmcroft Historic District, you may not have an inventory form, but we probably will still have a short little paragraph on your property from the National Register nomination that is better than nothing. Some of the neighborhoods, especially the ones that were done earlier during particular times, they weren't necessarily required to do inventory forms. Encanto Palmcroft is one of them. And if you are in the northwest section of Willow, kind of up near 7th Avenue and Thomas, there's a few streets up there that don't have inventory forms as well. We'll let you know if we don't have one. We'll see if maybe there's a building permit or something we can provide that at least gives you a construction date. So please check with us. Again, the vast majority of homes will have an inventory form, but if you're one of the few that doesn't, just mention in your application, I asked for an inventory form. The Historic Preservation Office did not have one for my property. So again, in this case, you see just a kind of a quick summary explaining the features of the home. You can mention the interior if you want, especially if there's some cool stuff in there, let us know. But really, we're primarily interested in the exterior because that's what the public is going to see and that's what's eligible for the grant funding. And you're welcome to quote directly from the inventory form if you want. If you have some questions about maybe some of the stuff on the inventory form doesn't look quite right, let us know. We can verify if some of it might need updating. And that does happen from time to time. Now, the fillable form only has a box that's so big. If you feel that there's more you want to talk about, you're welcome to attach a continuation sheet to your application. That's perfectly fine. Just kind of let us know. This is question number 1 continued on that continuation sheet. But for the most part, we expect that, you know, what you have to say should fit within the box that's on the fillable form. But again, you're not limited to it. If you've got more you want to share, go for it. Number 2 is describe your scope of work. And this is fairly important because we want to know what you're doing. Are you doing window repair? Then tell us, I have X number of wood casement windows on my home. I'm going to repair them. And here's kind of how I'm going to carry it out. And feel free to reference the bids from your contractor here if that helps. Explain what you're doing. By all means, you know, let us know what you're planning to do. And this is where we're really going to look to see that your scope of work meets the historic preservation standards. So be careful here. And you are required to attach photos. So if you want to kind of link this to the photos or to your site plan, go for it. That is actually very helpful when you do that. So we can kind of see visually where things are on the site and how it all fits together. Question number 3 is to briefly describe rehabilitation work that you've already done or maybe a previous owner did, so we can get a sense of, okay, you know, I'm focusing on repairing stucco because the last guy before me just did the roof 5 years ago. So the roof's good, but the stucco needs work, so that's where I'm emphasizing my work. So kind of let us know, and if it's part of a larger project, this is number 4, let us know. You know, this is phase 3 of my 5-phase project, and tell us how that all fits together. And then question number 5 is, how will this positively impact the historic property and the street? Will it be visible from the street? This is where maybe work on garages doesn't score so well, but work on the front of the house really scores very well. Again, the more visible, the greater the impact, the more likely you are to get funded. And then if you're addressing a serious maintenance problem or the critical repair that needs to get done, let us know. That also, again, helps improve your score. If the property is currently uninhabitable and you're bringing it back to productive use, those score very well because we want homes to be habitable. So let us know if that's the case. Again, attach your contractor bid for each item. Let's say you're going to do roof, stucco, and windows, and you've got 3 bids, 3 separate bids for those items, then attach 3 bids. Or if you've got a general contractor that's going to cover all those, that could potentially all be covered in just 1 bid. But let us know, you know, attach the estimates and make sure you've covered your entire scope with those estimates. and then write the exact bid amount in the bid amount column on page 4, which you'll see in just a moment. We do encourage you to have estimates that are within 60 days of the grant deadline. Now, again, that may be tough. Let's say you've got one from, 90 days, 120 days. We'll still honor it. It's okay. But we tend to see that there are price increases, the further out you go from when you got the bid. And if there are price increases, then, we have to deal with those. But again, the cutoff for grant funding is 20,000. So just know, whatever you ask for in the application, we'll fund half of it up to $20,000. Here's where you list out the contractor's name, the scope item, and then the dollar amount that corresponds to that item. The fillable form will automatically calculate it for you and divide it in half, and this will be the amount of your grant down here at the $9,795 in this example. So again, up to $40,000 we can worth of work, we can fund 20,000 as a 50% share. And then please be sure to give us the information on lien holders. We've covered that already, so I won't dwell on it any further, but there is a space at the end where you attach that information. The other attachments, these are fairly important. The first one is the historic property inventory form that I mentioned previously. Again, we're happy to provide that for you. Cost estimates, make sure that you attach those. Engineer's report, this is only needed if you're doing structural work. Let's say you're repairing a foundation, you're doing some other structural repair, please attach the report to your application. And then digital photos, we do ask that you provide photos, at least 2 photos for each scope of work item. The intent being that you're going to show the deteriorated features that require rehabilitation. And then we also ask that you kind of show some overall shots of the house and property, kind of standing from the street or sidewalk. A couple different angles is helpful so we can see, overall photos of the home. Now, important note here, we do want photographs to be in color. Even though black and white may be artistic, color photos really give us the best representation of the property and the work that you're doing. And then photos with explanatory notes, you can attach, let's say you want to do a PDF that shows, I'm going to put maybe 2 or 3 photos on the page with captions underneath and kind of arrows pointing to the problem area. That's fine. If you want to do something like that and attach that to your application, very helpful. But please also attach the actual photo files. And by that, I mean the JPEG files, the PNG files, the TIFF files, just the actual photo files themselves that aren't marked up or have any captions superimposed on them. But again, if you want to send us, printed, PDF of the photos themselves with captions and arrows, that's acceptable as well. Just make sure you do both. And then as far as the plans and archival documents, we do ask for a site plan. The site plan does not need to be professionally done. And in fact, I'll show you a couple of examples here in just a moment, but it does need to be to scale, and it should show the overall property and the location of the scope items that you're carrying out. At a minimum, it should include the location of property lines, streets, alleys, and easements. It should include an outline or footprint of all existing structures, location of driveways, parking areas, sidewalks, pools, fences, and other site features. And then the location of the work that you're actually carrying out so we can see where they are on the site. You'll only need elevations for certain types of work. Again, if you're going to change like one of the walls of the house, and this is really, I would expect this would only happen if you are restoring something. So let's say the front porch was enclosed, you're going to reopen that porch. We do want you to show an elevation of the house showing what will the front wall of the home look like once that porch is reopened. Are you going to have door openings, window openings there behind where the porch enclosure was. So we do need an elevation that would provide that information. But again, only if you were doing something like a porch reopening. You don't need it for most applications. And then archival documents, again, if you are reconstructing something that has been changed, we do want documentation showing what that feature looked like and how you know what it originally looked like. So if you've got older historic photographs, or if you've got plans, you might be lucky enough that you've got original plans that came with your house. Show us that documentation that verifies what you're doing is restoring. Submission deadlines, again, we've covered that, so I'll go over that. Submit your application by email, historic@Phoenix.gov. I've already talked about the 25 megabyte file size. And be sure to sign and date your application. That's fairly important. So that concludes the sample application. We've got the sample documents here. I am not going to spend a lot of time going through these, but just know that they're here. I'm going to hit the highlights very quickly. But this is an agreement, the program agreement, between you as the property owner and us as the city. And it includes the purchase price. So whatever your grant amount is, that is the purchase price essentially for the conservation easement. The scope of work will also be included in the agreement at the end as Exhibit A. And you're going to acknowledge that you've reviewed the documents and that you're going to comply with all the terms, and that your intention is to start work within 90 days of council approval and signing this agreement. And then there's certain conditions that need to be met before we can issue the grant funds. We're going to go ahead and execute the deed of conservation easement. The city will take care of the title report, so we'll know if you have any mortgages or liens on the property, and if you do, we need consent from the mortgage company or lien holder before we can record the deed of conservation easement or issue the grant funds. We also need proof of insurance, as was mentioned previously. The property does have to have city historic designation through an HP or HPL zoning classification. And then if you need a building permit, that needs to happen, as well as the certificate of appropriateness or certificate of no effect from the city. Not all projects may require building permits, so again, just check and make sure if your project needs one that you get that permit, but it may not if it's fairly simple repairs. And then again, the completion is supposed to be done within 2 years. That is a fairly hard and fast deadline. I apologize, this disbursement actually mentions 5 draws. That's an error. It's only 3 draws, so we will update that information. Just know 3 draws. There is a section in here, what happens if something goes wrong. There's a cure period where somebody can correct the work and we can come to an agreement on the work. I won't get into that right now, but just know that that's part of the agreement. And the grant funds are not transferable. So if you get approved with the funds, don't think you can turn around and then somebody else can go ahead and get the grant funds on your behalf. Just know our agreement is with you and you exclusively. If you sell the property before the project is done, then the grant funds go away. A new owner will need to reapply as part of a future round. And then we've got a signature page here that will have you as the owner sign. Our deputy city manager will sign on behalf of the city. And then at the end is Exhibit A, which is the scope of work. The next document we have is the deed of conservation easement. This is what, again, the city and the owner will sign, and this is what will actually get recorded with the property and will run with the land for either 15 or 20 years once you're done with the work. And again, just kind of got some preliminary recitals here. The agreement is that we're paying you X number of dollars to do certain work items, and in exchange, we're recording this conservation easement on the property. Some documentation will get done. And the city typically takes after photos when we come out and inspect the work, but you're welcome to provide the photos too if you like. You generally don't need to worry about it. But these after photos become the baseline then for the next 15 or 20 years, and we expect the property to maintain that same look during that 15 or 20 year period after the work is completed. So the photo documentation is fairly important. The section 2.2, there's quite a bit here, but just know we expect you to maintain the site during the 15 or 20 year time period in a good and sound state of repair. And any changes do need to come to the Historic Preservation Office for review. even if they don't require a building permit. Anything that's going to change the exterior appearance does need to come to us so we can review it and make sure that it's appropriate under the terms of the conservation easement. And so there's a whole list of things here that apply. Make sure you take a look at it and are familiar with it. This also includes the structural elements of the building as well as the facades. So the entire package, including the roof, is subject to the conservation easement. We do reserve the right to come out and inspect from time to time as needed. We don't do this very often unless somebody calls us and says, hey, they're tearing something down or they're making some changes, then we may come out and take a look at it, but we generally don't do it proactively. Again, we've mentioned the insurance requirements, so that is included in the deed of conservation easement. And you also have to make sure that you provide visual access to the property. So don't put a big wall in front of the home. Don't plant a bunch of trees that are going to hide the home from the street. Because the public funds are going into the property, we want the public to be able to see your beautiful home once the work is completed and be able to enjoy it from the street or sidewalk. You do not have to let people in the home by any means. If you want to voluntarily be part of the neighborhood home tour, you're welcome to do that, but it is not a requirement under this program. Again, this only applies to the exterior. And then again, insurance proceeds, if there is some damage to the property, we'll expect that the insurance funds will go to repairing it, and the city will want to sign off on that. There's several other things in here that have to do if there's a disagreement, how we work that out. So take a look at that. And then there's some other legal language again. At the end, we've got the signature page, and then there's Exhibit A, which is the legal description for the property. And then the final document is the consent agreement. This is for the lien holder to sign, so I'm not really going to spend time getting into this, but just know the lien holder does need to sign this before we can pay you. It's pretty straightforward, just them consenting to us recording the easement. And to be honest, we need this because in the event of a foreclosure, we still need the conservation easement to be valid. And so if for some reason you don't own the property anymore, the mortgage company forecloses, takes over the property, we still need the deed of conservation easement to be in effect through that 15 or 20-year time period. So there you go. That in a nutshell are the 6 documents that compose the packet. We'll go back now to the PowerPoint presentation and just finish up a few final things here. So key dates, whoops, get ahead of myself here, key dates. So again, the application date, November 18th. Please make sure you're aware of that. Submit all applications prior to that deadline. And then again, the staff advisory panel will meet the next month in December of 2022. The Historic Preservation Commission recommendation should take place at their January 2023 meeting. And then City Council approval is anticipated to happen in February of 2023. We will then need the approved applicants to do their vendor registration in March of 2023, and we will plan on signing agreements no later than April of 2023. And then the grant funds will need to get reserved. So again, this is money that's available this fiscal year. The fiscal year goes through June 30th of 2023. So we need you to get those agreements signed with us by April, and then the agreements get routed to the, again, deputy city manager, to the city clerk, city attorney for signature, and then they get uploaded into the financial system, and they get linked to your vendor registration and reserved to you for that 2-year time period. So the funds are yours, and again, as long as you complete the work in a timely manner, you won't lose the money. It's yours exclusively during that 2-year time frame. We do anticipate again that the work will start by July of 2023. Now again, if your lien holder or mortgage company drags their feet, it could take longer. Like I said, we're into September now on some of these from the previous round, but we're really hoping to do everything we can for work to start in July. And then again, 2 years from having agreements signed will take us out to April of 2025. That's when we expect all your work to be completed. So you can kind of circle back with your contractors and let them know this is the time frame where we think we're going to start and hope to be done by in order to utilize the grant funds. Finally, we've got some points to consider here. And some of this I've covered, but I just, again, want to emphasize these points. Get your inventory form as soon as possible and submit it with the grant application. This is your starting point. This will give you the basic information you need to fill out the application and save you from having to do any original research on your own. You're certainly welcome to do some follow-up research if you like, but probably 90% of what you need, maybe even more, will be in that inventory form. Make sure that the work meets the preservation philosophy. Again, repair rather than replace, preserve as much as you can. Be familiar with the philosophy, follow it. You'll be in good shape if you do. Get your contractors' estimates ASAP. You know, a lot of contractors are very busy these days. Don't wait till the last minute. You might find yourself too late if you do that. And then the application attachments, be sure to include those photo files, the JPEGs, the PNG, the TIFF files. Make sure that you include them as well as any, photos with captions and arrows. However you want to structure it is up to you, but we do need the actual photo files. And then be sure to include your site plan as well. And again, I'll show you some examples here in just a moment. Get in touch with your lien holders as soon as you can and provide the most appropriate contact information in the application. So again, the easier you can make this for us to find the right person at your mortgage company, the faster it'll go. And then number 7, don't wait until the last minute to turn your application. Number 8, confirm with us that we received it. We will generally go ahead once we receive something and reply back and say, oh, thank you, we received your application. But again, if you split it up into multiple emails or you have multiple attachments, make sure we got everything. We can't guarantee that we got everything unless you check with us and confirm that we got it. So here are just a couple of quick examples of an inventory form. This is a very simple one-page version. Some of these can be 2, 3 pages or even more. If the person preparing the form went to a lot of work on it. But this form is for a house in Windsor Square. Tells you the construction date. It's got, just again, basic information on the house. Fortunately, doesn't tell us the original owner, architect, or builder in this case, but many of them will have that information. And again, it has a photo. This photo is from 1995. Most of these forms were done right before the neighborhood became an historic district. And in a lot of cases, these are the oldest photos we may have of your property. But again, it's a good place to start. And then here are some examples of site plans. Now this one was for a roofing project, so it showed us the overall site, but then showed us here's the roof for the home, the main portion of the home, which is going to have new wood shingles on the main body of the house. The rear patio is going to have modified rubber system on the flat roof, as well as the carriage house. Here's another example of a site plan. Again, not professionally done, just done by the owner, showing us where all the windows are that we're going to get repaired, and then highlighted in orange areas where masonry repointing was going to take place on both the main house and the garage. And then they were actually going to do some roof work at the back of the house, and that's highlighted in yellow. So another type of example here. This one, you can see another window project kind of pointing out where the windows are, numbering them, which then kind of correspond to the photos, the numbers that are on the photos. Very helpful. Again, not professionally done. There's any number of ways you can do this. Just do the best you can. You may be able to print an aerial photo from the county assessor's website and trace it. That's a possibility. Or again, just eyeball it the best you can. We're not going to critique you on accuracy. We just want to make sure it's something we can understand. And then questions and answers. We do want to open this up. I think we've already had some questions submitted, but just some real things that do commonly come up. Can I do the work myself? Yes. But if you are going to do the work yourself, we do limit you to just materials, the cost of materials. We won't pay you for labor. We will only pay for labor if it's a licensed contractor or workman who's doing the work. If you're the owner doing it yourself, then again, we would only pay you for the cost of materials. So you can submit your receipts from Home Depot or wherever, and we can pay you 50% of that cost. Can non-contributing properties receive grant funds? We kind of hit this earlier, but the answer is sometimes. If it's non-contributing due to age, then the answer is no. But if it's non-contributing due to changes to the property and those changes can be reversed, then the answer is yes. You may be a very good candidate for grant funds. If you're not sure, check with us before you submit. Can I apply if I don't own the property? Again, we hit this earlier too, but if you don't own the property, we basically want something from the owner that confirms that they're authorizing you to submit on their behalf. Or let's say you've got a purchase agreement, let's say you're submitting for the November deadline, but you plan to take possession in December or January. You can go ahead and submit that, noting that by the time we sign agreements in April, you will be the owner. Just explain the situation to us so we understand what's happening. And then how do I find documentation of what my home originally looked like? This can be challenging. Again, start with the inventory form. In most cases, those are going to be the oldest photos we've got of the home, but we may get lucky. There may be a newspaper article that shows what the home looked like or describes what the home looked like. There may be plans. They're hard to come by, but in some cases they do exist. There may be information that we can glean, especially if you're doing a roofing project, from the Sanborn fire insurance maps. So if you're doing a roofing project, you may want to check with us and say, hey, can you tell me what was the original roofing material on my home? And the Sanborn fire insurance maps are great because a lot of those go back to the 40s. We even have some that go back to the teens that tell us, if the home originally had wood shingles, or if the home had asphalt, or if the home had clay tile. And that'll give us a good idea of what to recommend to you for your roofing project. And then aerial photos can also be helpful too. There's certain things that can help answer this question, but it can be tough to answer sometimes. Again, start with the inventory form. If you've got follow-up questions, let us know and we'll try to answer them. Are the grant funds taxable income? The answer is no. You do not have to pay taxes on the grant funds. Again, we're considering it a purchase of a conservation easement, so it is not income. You don't need to declare it. And then final question, can I sell my home if it has a conservation easement? The answer is yes. The conservation easement is not intended to prevent anyone from selling their home, but again, just know it's going to run with the land for either 15 or 20 years afterward, and the new owner is going to have to be aware of it and agree to follow the terms of the easement. So on that note, I think we've got some questions. So let me stop sharing here. Crystal or Helena, whoever's in the best position to share questions, let me know what questions we might have.
All right, our first question is from Mandy Cornelius, who asks, I have a wood siding house, only a few here in Willow. It needs replacing due to inappropriate repair, piecemealing, and termite damage. Would this be eligible for repair?
The answer is yes. And Crystal and Helena, feel free to jump in if you have any additional insight. But yes, if you've got wood siding that can be repaired, by all means do it. That would be a good item to include in your scope of work. If for some reason it is completely beyond repair, and again, it would have to be pretty bad for that to be the case, or let's say you've got sections that are missing, you may be able to replicate that siding, but we would ask you to do a fairly faithful replication, match it as closely as you can, but repair first. Again, preservation philosophy says repair first. If you can bring it back and restore that back to its original beauty, go for it. Any other insights, or does that cover it?
So Kevin, just to put it out there, if someone wanted to do like a composite siding and submitted for that as a replacement material, how would that be evaluated?
It would be considered an acceptable alternative, but it would not score as high as true wood siding. Again, we're encouraging people through the grant program to take more of a restoration approach. And so we want you to use authentic materials, try to get it as close as you can to the original, matching the size, you know, the finish, that sort of thing. You know, you could potentially, again, if it's in bad shape and repair's not an option and you want to replace, you could do an alternative material. Like I said, it just probably wouldn't score as well as wood would. So summarize: repair, score the highest. Replace with true wood would score the next highest. Replace with an alternative material would score the lowest. All right, other questions?
Yeah, I can go ahead and read another one for you. We have from Lee Brown: if the foundation of my historic home and the newer addition is failing, could I apply for just the historic portion of the house?
That is a good question. You know, foundations are tough. Normally we'd say, yeah, don't apply for the addition. But if there's a severe structural issue and the structural engineer is recommending to do the entire house, I think we would take that into account. Obviously, the historic portion of the house is going to take precedence. What we would say don't do is, you know, do an application for just the addition, because that is not going to score well. If you're going to do the foundation repairs for the original part, that will score very well. If you're going to do the whole thing, I don't think we would penalize you for it if the engineer is recommending it, but don't just do the addition. Did I answer that okay? All right.
Yeah, it looks like she notes I might need to demo the addition. So
Okay. And assuming it's a non-historic addition, that would be okay and eligible for funding. All right. Other questions?
yeah, question from Scott Stovall. If I get a grant, can I apply again in the future? Is there a lifetime limit?
Good question. It used to be back in the day that if you applied, you could not reapply until your easement had expired. We have since relaxed that rule, and we have actually let people reapply, but just know your chances of getting funded are probably not as good. We would encourage you to include everything you can the first time, because chances are it'll help your score if you have a big scope of work. If you try to split it up in phase and say, okay, I'm going to apply for this one thing, then I'm going to come back and apply for this other thing, it could possibly hurt your score. So there's a bit of a risk involved. And if you do split it up, let us know. My intention is I'm going to start with this highest priority item first. This is phase one. So if you've got structural work or roof repairs or something like that that desperately needs to be done first, start there. And then if your intention is to come back later and reapply for something that's perhaps less of a priority, let us know that's your plan. So we can kind of say, okay, makes sense. We're with you, you know, go ahead. But just know, you know, you're going to be competing against people twice. And so if you get approved the first time, there is some risk that you may not get approved the second time if there's some pretty highly competitive applications the second time around. So just know it may be better in those cases to just apply for everything up front, get you the highest score possible, but it's up to you. We will not tell you you cannot come back and reapply. Let's say you want to reapply 4 or 5 years from now, you still have an active easement, you can do it. You can reapply with an active easement. All right, other questions?
Yeah, we do have some more questions. So Ruth actually asked quite a few questions. So,
It's good.
and my apologies, Ruth. I won't try to pronounce your last name. I'll skip that. But Ruth wanted to know of, just some examples of successful applications from last year, the number of applicants, and how many participants are here tonight. And so,
Yeah, okay. I can kind of give you the big picture on last year and this year. We had 12 applications funded last fiscal year, and both last year and this year we had $200,000 in grant funding made available, by the city council. So we'll see, what comes in this year. Again, if we got a bunch of little projects, everybody asks for 5,000, then we can fund more grants. If we got a bunch of big projects where everybody asks for 20,000, then the money, we'll only do 10 grants. It won't go as far. So we'll see. I mean, I anticipate we'll probably end up somewhere between 12 and 18, most likely. The type of work that got funded last time, we saw a pretty good variety. We had, I think, 3 or 4 roofing projects. Those tend to score fairly well, again, especially if you're using fairly authentic materials. Foundation repair, again, fairly important to keeping the house standing before you can do anything else. I know we got 2 or 3 of those. We got some window projects where people were repairing original windows. We got some that included stucco and masonry repair. It was actually a pretty good variety. We weren't just limited to one particular type of, of work. So again, just, make sure that what you're doing addresses the most critical needs of the building. And, if you can have an impact on the streetscape, those tend to score fairly well too. But yeah, I don't know exactly how many attendees we've had tonight, but, and again, this is not required for people to be here tonight to submit the application. We've encouraged it, but you don't have to be here. You can go ahead and submit without having attended the workshop. We're also making this recording available on the website when we're done here tonight, so people can come back and watch it if they missed the event tonight. So there may be more people that watch it later than were here tonight. So we honestly don't know how many people might be interested in the funding. I will tell you, we had a large number of applicants last year. We had over 60 applications. Now, a lot of those were folks that submitted but didn't quite understand the program, and so they were immediately disqualified. They're asking for new vinyl windows, or they were asking for work on non-contributors. I think a couple of them didn't have city historic designations, so we were able to kind of thin that number out pretty quickly. But that was the most applications we have ever had. In the rounds prior to last year, we usually average somewhere between 10 and 30 applications. I'm anticipating we're probably not going to have quite as many this year as we did last year, because we went 6 years without a round last year, and I think there was some pent-up demand. So we'll see what we come in this time. I don't know what to expect. We'll see, but it could be fairly competitive, just to be honest. So again, just plan your applications the best you can to get the highest possible score. Any other questions?
I will just jump in really quick. Ruth had some other questions. You did answer some of these already about the decisions, the timeline for the approvals and everything. And to jump down to one of her other questions, she asked, is it advantageous to be on both the National Register and the Phoenix Historic Property Register? And I guess I can answer that. To us, it's mostly important to be on the Phoenix Register, whether as a contributor, individually listed, or as Kevin mentioned, if you're a non-contributor currently due to some alterations and you want to try and reverse that work, that could be a good application. But we're focused on the Phoenix Register.
Yeah, whether you're on the National Register doesn't have any bearing on your eligibility for this program. You just have to be on the city register, as Crystal said. Now, there are some nice benefits for being on the National Register. There's a pretty good property tax reduction, and so If you're on the National Register and you're not receiving that tax reduction, contact the State Historic Preservation Office and they can help you out potentially with a tax reduction. But that's entirely separate from the grant program here tonight. Any other questions?
Yeah. Karen Jean Martinson had asked, well, first she thanked you for the workshop. She did ask if a HELOC is considered a lien on the property, which it is. So if any mortgage or lien holders on the property would have to sign a consent agreement. She asked if the conservation easement would prevent the construction of a detached casita in the backyard, designed to match and not be visible. Conservation easements don't prevent new construction, so we could look at still approving that. We encourage really people to follow the guidelines for the certificates of no effect in terms of new construction of detached buildings. If it was something that was going through a hearing, that because it was going to be visible, then we would, even more strongly, not recommend or support that. But if it's not visible from the street and it meets the other over-the-counter guidelines, that would be fine. And then she did ask if we partially fund projects. Let's see, or is it a full yes or a full no? I asked because we're hoping to rehabilitate our windows, which are original, and remove the security bars from them. Once the bars are removed, we will need to patch and paint around the windows. We also intend to paint the entire house. I was told the house painting may or may not be funded. If we included it in the grant proposal, is there a scenario where part, the windows, are funded and part, the painting is not?
I can address that. So to answer the first part, is it all or nothing? We have on certain occasions approved applications. Let's say you've got 5 scope of work items and 4 of them are just fantastic. And the 5th one, you're like, oh, that's not great. But your overall score still comes out to where you make the cut. We may say, okay, we're going to go ahead and fund your application because your overall score was good, but we're going to take this one item out as a stipulation. So we have done that in cases, but if you're not sure, if something is going to hurt your score, it's honestly better not to include it. Now, as far as the painting question, really the intent of the grant program is to just not fund painting projects that are solely painting projects. So if your house needs a new paint job and that's all you're interested in doing, this grant program is not the best fit. Because honestly, to go through the whole exercise of dealing with your mortgage company and having them sign a consent agreement and recording a conservation easement just for a paint job, frankly, is probably not worth your time or the city's time. The intention is really to do more broader, more comprehensive rehabilitation projects. And that's where painting does fit in. So if you're doing windows and you're doing stucco and you're doing a roof project, and then you're going to repaint the house as part of that broader project, then yes, you can include painting. It doesn't have to be just limited to painting of the windows. It could be painting of the entire house, as long as, again, it's part of a larger scope of work. Right.
I think that was it, unless did you see anything else, Crystal? Those were the. All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, especially those who stuck it out to the end. We appreciate you being here and asking good questions. I know it was a lot of me talking, but if you do want to go back, once we get the recording completed and up on the website, if you want to go back and kind of review any of it, you're welcome to. Or if you have questions, by all means, email us at historic@Phoenix.gov. That is the best way to reach all of us. That email address is always monitored. And again, that's how we want you to ultimately submit your application too. But let us know, and if you need an inventory form, we're happy to send it. Anything else we can help with, we'll do it. Otherwise, I think we're done.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Let's stop recording, Kevin.